Hey, Brad here from Breva Creative, and today we are going to muddle our way through this video. And we're in the process going to make a muddler. So this muddler is going to be for my my brother-in-law, Steven. Shout out to him. And yeah, we're going to use this trusty lathe here and turn something really cool for him. So check it out. Okay, we have our wood here, and this is just a little piece of hickory. It's got some nice grain to it, and it has it's hickory, which is a really dense, heavy wood, which is going to be great for us as we're trying to make something that is meant to crush things. So yeah, lots of crushing power with this guy. Let's do it. First of all, I kind of have a little bit of a bad feeling that something is going to happen to my shop today. I don't know what, but I just keep getting this weird feeling of... So yeah, we're going to make a mess in this shop today, but it's all going to be worth it. So there's a couple things you're going to need if you are going to do this project. First of all, a lathe. This is just a 10-inch by 18-inch mini wood lathe. It works great, haven't had any problems with it. Had to clear off some rust off of this surface here, but that's about it. Obviously you're gonna need some chisels. These are just standard chisels that came with the set. I think you can get these at Harbor Freight. I would not get these at Harbor Freight if I were you, but this is what I have, so it's what it is. Pencil, one of these little guys just to finish your project off. I like to use some wire for some of this, so hold on and see what I use that for. And lastly, we are going to need some sort of finish. I have not used this stuff before, so I'm going to let you know how it goes. But this is Howard's Wax It All grade wax. We need a food grade wax because obviously this is going to be in contact with food. So this contains beeswax, carnauba wax, and food grade mineral oil. And you can see it's kind of got like a really nice hard texture, but then softens with heat, just like a beeswax should do. And we'll see how it goes. So huge shout out to Robert at the Old School Makerspace for letting me use his lathe chisel sharpening attachment for a grinder. With a dense wood like hickory, sharp chisels are an absolute must. And hey, if you are in the San Antonio area, be sure to check out the Old School Makerspace. They have some awesome classes if you're interested in this kind of stuff. Here I've got a worm screw that connects to my lathe chuck. There's a lot of ways to mount wood to a lathe, but this method is really easy and pretty safe on most small scale pieces. And I will put a link below to the one that we used in this video. Just make sure that your worm screw is really seated well in your chuck. There's a gap in the worm screw where the chuck latches into it. You should also just throw some wax on the worm screw before putting the wood on it. That'll just make it a lot easier to remove when you're done with it. Next, find center on both ends of the wood and use an awl and mallet to mark that center. Then use a drill press to make a hole at one of the center points that you marked for your worm screw to fit onto. For bit size, use the recommendations on your worm screw instructions. Okay, I've seen people put the wood on a worm screw with the lathe on at a low RPM. Only do that if you're super comfortable with it, and definitely not if your piece is not round to begin with. If I were to do that with this piece, it would just tear my hands up. Instead, I like to thread it on manually. It was a little difficult with a dense wood, but I had to just increase the drill bit size by like a 64th of an inch or something to get it seated properly. Once the wood is properly seated, get your tailstock in place and your tool rest where it needs to be, and do a quick test and make sure that you're ready to start lathing. And here we are, lathing. First, start out with your largest gauge, especially if you're working with a non-circular piece, and just knock down those corners until you get to a cylinder. This is always the scariest part. You're testing how well your wood is seated, while at the same time knocking off those corners, which if you've ever lathed before, you know can be a little bit daunting. If you're starting out with a non-cylindrical piece, always put your lathe on the slowest RPM setting. Steady straight lines is the name of the game when it comes to using gouges to round out your piece. And since my tool rest is pretty short, I'm going to get half of my wood round and then move the tool rest to the other side and take care of that other half. And there we go, a nice relatively flat cylinder that we can use to form our muddler. To smooth it out, I like to take a quick pass at the whole thing with my skew chisel, and again, just a nice slow straight line. If you really need a super straight line for whatever you're making, you can always get a pair of calipers to measure the diameter and keep that consistent throughout the project. Next comes the initial shaping. Depending on what your preference is, there's a few ways to do this. I like to get as much of the final shape that I want before I move on to another section, as long as the wood doesn't get too thin too soon. You do kind of want to remove the mass of the wood in a way that is equally distributed, i.e. you don't want like a full log on one side of your project and a small spindly piece on the other end. The rotational force of the larger portion will cause a lot of issues and potentially fly off your lathe, which, I mean, maybe you're into that kind of stuff. I'm not here to judge, but generally speaking, you really don't want that to happen. Also, since I've finished the scary part of rounding out the wood, I can comfortably increase the speed of the lathe. On this lathe, you have to adjust the belt, which is a little bit more cumbersome. Just make sure to unplug your lathe before you get your fingers all up in those gears. What I'm doing here is creating a flat place for your hand to grab the muddler and a little ring you'll see in a little bit to catch your hand from slipping. The idea is that your thumb will fit right below or on that first little ball that I made, and your other 4 fingers below that with your pinky against this little ring that I'm making in the middle. And if that didn't make any sense at all, just wait till the end for a visual demonstration. And I'm just using my little parting tool here to really get into that crevice of that ring. I just want to give this ring a little bit of inside curve just for a little bit more definition. Now I'm moving on to the muddling portion, where you can see I've added a little bit of a curvy neck that will reach into the glass to muddle your limes or sugar or whatever you have. Beyond that, I'm making a secondary ring to complement the other one, just design wise. And then from there, I'm making a large flat surface for maximum lime squishes. I'm really not planning this as much as I should. Sometimes you can get extremely mathematical and precise and lay out your piece before you start lathing. What I like to do is more akin to like using a pottery wheel, where you just feel the design as you do it and just kind of go with the flow. Now that I've got my basic shape, I'm taking some 80 grit sandpaper to it. In those really tight corners, I like to fold up a little small piece of sandpaper and just put it on that inside curve and really get in there. I use the 80 grit to assist in minor shape adjustments, meaning like getting lines nice and even, making curves more continuous, stuff like that. And as I alluded to at the beginning of this video, I'm going to do some really awesome wood burning with a little bit of wire. I'm making a quick divot with a saw blade, and then I'm using some metal wire that fits nicely inside that groove to create a ton of friction. Speeding up your lathe also helps with this. What you want to see is the wire changing colors, kind of get like a black discoloration, and then your wood will start smoking. Let it smoke for a couple of seconds. Don't overdo it though, and once it's good, just let off the wire. The wire gets super hot, obviously, and it's really easy to burn yourself, so don't touch hot wires, unlike me. That just turned out so beautiful, and I'm going to do another 3 stripes at the top here for decoration. I think it's going to look hot. This is just so much fun. Honestly, this is my favorite part. We're gonna hit this with some sandpaper now. I did 120, 150, 220, 400, 1000 wet, 2000 wet. Yeah, I went overboard. But just look at that shine. That's before any finish gets applied. And speaking of finish, here is our Howard's Wax It All food grade wax. And we're gonna get started with that. And I'm just using a simple paper towel to apply the finish. I found that rubbing the finish into the paper towel a little bit helps to prevent little chunks of beeswax from flying all over the place when you're applying it on a high-speed lathe. And here we go. Oh yeah, that's the good stuff. Make sure to get in all those little crevices and corners. I'll let this first coat sit for about an hour or so, then come back with a light second coat just to make sure I've hit all of those little places. Once I cut it off the lathe, I'll have to add a little bit of finish to the ends just to finish it off, but I really like how smooth this stuff goes on when you're applying it on a lathe, so we're doing the majority of it on the lathe. That little knot on the tip of the muddler came out so great. I'm so happy with it, and so far I'm really loving this wax finish. Good job, Howard. Yeah, I am so happy with that shine. I'm loving it. Moving on, it's time to free our dizzy little muddler from this spinning death machine. I'm going to use just a little hacksaw blade to make the cut. I like to work at this from both ends, getting the far end down as small as possible without it breaking, and then going all the way on the end closest to the chuck while holding the piece with my right hand. I'm making sure that I don't rub the finish too much with my right hand as I wait for it to fall off, and I'm just letting the muddler fall off when it wants to instead of forcing it. And there it goes. Look at that pretty little thing. And hey, take all that leftover sawdust that you have from lathing and put it to good use. As long as it's not pressure treated, you can take this stuff and add it to your compost, and it breaks down so fast and helps retain moisture and quickens the composting process. Okay, and back to the project. I'm making the muddling end nice and smooth. I'll go ahead and hit it again with finer sandpaper later on. Oh no, Brad, what are you doing with that bandsaw? You're going to ruin it. That's foreshadowing and a pun all mixed up into one. I honestly was a bit hesitant to make this cut, but looking back on it, it actually turned out great, so yeah. And just a little bit of a vroomy vroom on the sander here. Sorry y'all, it is getting late and I clearly need a nap. So, Steven, the guy that I'm making this for, has a rune tattoo, thus the foreshadowing pun earlier. Rewind if you didn't catch it. So I've sketched out the symbol on that top end, and I'm going to take a wood burner to it. I found that wood burning on hickory is actually pretty challenging. You need to get the tool really hot and just take your time with it, because it just takes forever. I'll hand sand this till it's nice and smooth, and then hit it with a couple layers of wax and let it dry for a little bit. And that is it. We have a finished muddler and it looks so good. I am so happy with how it turned out. The finish that I used is so awesome. Definitely highly recommend for any food grade application. And I can't just let Steven have all the fun. I'm going to make one of my favorite muddled drinks, a Caipirinha. We've got some limes and demerara sugar to crush, so it'll be a good test of the durability of the wax finish. Side note, I definitely would wash this by hand and not put it in the dishwasher. You'll probably see a quicker degradation of the finish if you did. I didn't see any sort of damage to the finish after I made this drink. Granted, I've only used it this one time, so I can't speak to the longevity of it, but dang, it sure looks nice. You may have to routinely apply an extra coat of wax if you start to see any wear, but again, only time will tell. And man, do I make a good caipirinha. If you don't know what that is, look it up. It's similar to a mojito, but with cachaça instead of rum. Anyways, hope you enjoyed this video. Subscribe, comment, like, and all that good stuff. Bye!